Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Emerging Franchise Brands Podcast. I'm your host, Frank Fiume, here live at the IFA2024 National Convention, and looking forward to interviewing some folks at this year's event. All right, it's my pleasure to have Shafik Mina on the episode. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being on. So, why don't you tell the audience what you guys do? What's your company? What's your brand? What do you guys do?
Awesome. So, our parent company is 2inspire Kids, and we have two brands. Math Science is the leading science enrichment brand in the world. 30 years in business, 20 plus countries, and our new brand, Crayola Imagine Arts Academy. We want to do the same thing within the arts, same thing within the sciences and the arts, and we're doing it with the biggest brand in art, Crayola.
Wow. Well, I mean, everybody knows what Mad Science is from back in the day. If you've been involved in franchising in the past 20, 30 years, you definitely know the name.
You're very kind. We worked hard to achieve, I think, what we achieved. And it was a niche we found many years ago. And I think that niche exists today. There's a lot of money that is being taken out of schools and school systems in the arts. And they're so important. So we felt there was an opportunity to do what we did in science and the arts. And it's really needed. I was in an AI session not too long ago. We're here at the IFA, and it was an AI session, and they were talking about AI, and the question came up of what are we going to need for our kids to have? I have young kids. What are my kids going to need to have as skills to compete with AI in 10, 15, 20 years? It's going to get better, right?
Sure.
So that's what Crayola Imagine Arts Academy is focusing on. Those skills that I think my kids will need to have.
So tell us a little bit more about, we know the Crayola name.
Right.
Tell us a little bit more about what exactly the franchise concept does.
Lovely. So our tagline is art with purpose. Not that art alone is not good enough, but we wanted to use art as a platform to teach kids skills that we think are going to be critical. Right? So some of the skills, we did a lot of research, first of all. We spent about 3 years researching what was out there, what were the missing pieces in the market. And we identified a few what we think are the critical skills to have, right? And they're the soft skills. I'm not going to tell you anything that's going to blow your mind away. Right. But what's going to distinguish us from computers are going to be things like creativity, conflict resolution, empathy, people management. These are the skills that I think are going to be high-paying jobs in the future. So what we did is we created art programs that infuse that learning for kids. So one of the biggest surprises for me that I learned was I thought creativity was something you had or you didn't. And I would have put myself in the bracket where I'm not creative. Well, all the current research on creativity, which surprised me, is that creativity is a muscle. The more you practice the creativity muscle, the more creative you are and the more you identify yourself as creative. So if creativity is going to be so critical in the future, we got to get our kids trained to practice their creativity muscle. So that's one of the things that CIAA, not the CIA, CIAA does.
That's brilliant because it becomes, if you are practicing that muscle, it becomes your identity.
Yes.
And essentially you want people to feel like they're creative, but they have to believe in it. They have to know it's part of who they are.
Yes, I go even further. I think it has to be second nature.
Sure.
You shouldn't be thinking, I'm thinking creatively.
Right.
It just has to be a muscle. Like, when you're in danger, you have a reflex muscle that says, I'm in danger, and you act a certain way. Well, you have to have that reflex muscle that you're creative. And creative is not an artist. I used to be an attorney in another life. And to be a good attorney, you had to be creative. To be an architect, you have to be creative. To be a salesperson, you have to be creative. Creativity is not just for artists. Creativity is, you need it in any business, any career business you're doing. So we want it to be a reflex. And I think that's what we're striving for.
That's awesome. All right, so we're here at the IFA. This is the last full day. What have been your top maybe one or two takeaways at this event?
The IFA is about meeting people. As a franchisor, it's about kind of understanding best practices from other franchise systems, making sure you're not out in left field entirely, and that what you're doing in your system is good and or improving it. So that's the biggest takeaway always, and I think it's always the same thing in the IFA, and I appreciate it, and it's comforting. And then I think understanding also IA, how is artificial intelligence going to impact franchising specifically? right? It's going to have an impact on how we do business, how we recruit franchisees, how we train them, how we present ourselves to the general public. So understanding that has been a very big eye-opener for me.
Do you agree with the philosophy that just like when the internet started, people didn't get replaced by the internet, they had to change their skill set? Do you feel the same way about AI?
Yes. I think I've spent enough time now seeing many different perspectives on AI, and now I add the franchise perspective or franchise business perspective. And I think AI is going to change the skills that we will have. I think there's a lot of careers that are technical careers. And I think the technical careers are the ones that are at risk. Because if it's technical, it's repeatable, and eventually a machine will be able to learn it. So that's what at risk. But I think so it will not replace jobs. It will change the nature for jobs, and maybe for the better. Maybe the jobs will be more mindful and challenging and enriching, rather than repetitive. So I never think the technology is bad. I think how we use it or how we leverage it determines if it's good or bad.
Shafik, I think that was so well said. I agree with you too. I think that there's always good and bad players in anything, but at the end of the day, it's how we use that tool. And I agree. I think it's going to create, obviously, an incredible number of new jobs. It's going to change the skill set. And maybe it's sort of like when we go back to the internet, it was the older generation. Really, it was the silent generation that didn't even want anything near the internet. And now we have a lot of the baby boomer generation that sees AI as, I'm afraid of this thing. This thing is going to replace me. But that's why the Gen Xers and obviously millennials and Gen Z have to embrace this, because we've been through the internet. We saw the dawn of the internet.
Yeah, look, I'm old enough, I don't put you in my category, but I'm old enough to have seen the evolution from the landline, the telephone, that was attached to the wall, and you had to pick it up and answer the phone.
Absolutely, and we had the long cord too.
Right, the long cord. You
so you could talk from the living room.
And then came the modem, and if the call came in, your internet went down, right? And the internet, to mobile phones, to having on my phone everything I need to do. So our generation, I think, has benefited from a tremendous amount of evolution in a very short period of time. So I think we have a good perspective to say that, again, the technology is not the problem. You can have the same technology used for evil as it can be used to significantly improve humanity. And I'm hoping that people who are afraid of technology can look back at that and say, okay, what have we learned from when these other things happen, so we don't make the same mistakes again, right? How do we make sure that this time around we get more benefit and less negative?
Sure. Yeah, human nature, right?
Yeah.
That's part of it, but I get it. One last thing for you.
Yes.
So, obviously, you've been in franchising a long time, but you get it. Like, you have a new emerging brand. What's a piece of advice that you would give, say me, if I was starting a new brand as an aspiring franchisor, what's maybe one piece of advice you'd give to somebody before they start franchising their company?
I think the biggest advice I would give them is pick an industry that gives you some kind of passion. And because I think, like in anything, there's going to be good days and bad days. And when you have the bad days, I think passion makes it a little easier to get through. So pick an industry that gives you passion, that drives you, and understand, especially in franchising, that a huge part of the success, you first have to cross the box of being with a good franchisor. But there's enough ways to find that out today. But once you've done that, you are the determinant of your success. You carry almost 95% of the burden to make you successful. The franchisor is just providing the fuel. But yeah, be passionate about what you do.
Shafik, that's great advice. Thank you so much for being on. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This has been awesome.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Right, take care.
Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fiume, or Emerging Franchise Group LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.